welcome to our final week of the term, week 6, and putting our plans together. After everything that we discussed throughout the term, I hope you find that this lecture is just as interesting and interactive. And putting the plans together can be difficult at times, but we're going to look at some of the things that you can do to put your plan together in a more efficient manner and ensure that the policies and procedures are up to date, as well as future planning efforts with your community stakeholders. Your recovery planning, well, basically that's putting the plan together in order to recover from any type of disaster or emergency. And then you need to do the following measures here. So you need to establish a planning team that's going to be consisting of perhaps 5 to 7 people, which is a good span of control. Also analyzing the capabilities and the hazards that are out there. So what are the capabilities of the team? What are some of the hazards that are being faced in the community or your particular organization? Eventually, you're leading to the development of the plan once you're gathering all the information together and the data that may be collected out there externally. And then finally, implementing the plan through perhaps training and exercises and working alongside community stakeholders and representatives. Leadership will be the key for the implementation. I can't emphasize that enough. Without leadership buy-in, everything that I just mentioned to you will be for naught, because leadership is driving recovery planning. Leadership is driving everything that's dealing with the team, with the hazards, with the planning, and with the establishment of the plan and implementing that plan. Having good leadership at the top may be difficult at times. Sometimes there's a conflict that occurs. However, in order to mitigate some of those circumstances too, you need to be able to identify that this is life safety, these are life hazards, and that having this type of recovery plan will not only be beneficial for example, in a hospital for the patients, but also in dealing with financial matters as well. Finding a good team can be difficult at times. Let's face it, one thing that's constant in healthcare is change, and that changes on a daily basis. We are all busy. We all have things that are occurring, especially if the emergency department happens to be busy, or risk management has visits from the public health department, whatever it may be. Team formation can be challenging at times. However, gathering team members is going to be influential in creating your recovery plan. And looking at this, your team size is going to depend on the size of the organization. Of course, if you have a smaller organization, you're going to have a smaller team. A larger organization, you're probably going to have a larger team that's going to participate. And then you encourage participation. So, for example, if you happen to be the leader of that particular team and the recovery efforts, you want encouragement of participation. You don't want to just force and say, we're going to do this and that's it. Nobody's going to participate, nobody's going to feel wanted, and they're going to feel lackluster in being able to try and perform this group effort in order to mitigate and propagate against any type of emergencies that are out there. It makes it much worse. So encourage participation. And then include management, HR, safety, public relations, marketing, financing, etc., in order to have a good blend of people that are in there, different perspectives from different areas, and different departments are definitely part of the blend that you want with that team. So this way you can have different pieces of the puzzle put together for your policy implementation. And then establish authority. Who's in charge of the circus? Or I mean the team. That's right, the team. That's what I meant to say. So who's in charge of the team? You need somebody that's going to be on top of things. So it doesn't have to be yourself. It can be somebody who's always wanted the opportunity, perhaps, that you've heard about, that they wanted to do a leadership role and never had the opportunity to. Well, here's a chance to do so. If that's the case, then allow them to lead. If not, then you figure out by a majority vote on who's going to be in charge. So this way you can progress and move forward. So how do we create a sense of order, and how do we create a sense of belief? Well, in looking at the mission statement, and then for the executive team members that are out there, a budget. Yes, they call it a budget. Finances, ooh, yes, that's the part that they like to hear. So in order to have a good team concept, you need to define the purpose of the plan. What is the mission that is out there, not missions, one mission statement. You see a mission, this is what we're doing, this is the reason why we're here. Not we're doing this and we're doing this. It becomes convoluted and then you lose it along the way. If you read a good mission statement, it's going to be very concise, very specific, and is going to be focused on one area of that organization. Include authority and structure, how you're going to go about it, what are we going to do, who's in charge of finances, who's in charge of budget, who's going to write, who's going to be dealing with the presentation, who's going to eventually be the keeper of the document, etc., etc. And create a schedule with planning and deadlines for the budget. And the reason why I'm saying create a schedule, you need time on task, because when you're doing this, life doesn't stop out there. Disasters don't stop out there. You need to have something that's going to be updated, and you're going to need some contact information as well as some finances. And all this takes time. You might start this project and say, oh, we'll be done in a couple weeks, and 3 months later, you're still doing it. It happens due to the fact that there's a lot of things that occur, certain site visits, certain things that people are on vacation, key components are missing that you can't get at the time. You need to be patient, and you also need to be focused. That's the reason why you need to understand what the purpose of this plan or what the purpose of this team is going to be. Once you have your team, then you need to identify your resources. So we have a lot of resources that you can use. So for example, your internal resources, you have your personnel. Of course, you're going to rely on your fire brigades, your medical services, your emergency management people, public information officer, etc. So these are people that you should become familiar with if you haven't done so already, or if your organization does not have this many people within, then at least you have a general idea of perhaps who's within your community that falls into these categories as far as personnel. That's good to have external stakeholders look at your policy development and your recovery plan as well. Equipment, communications, first aid, supplies, sheltering, and looking at media outlet room. All these are important when you're making a recovery plan, because you need this stuff. You're going to need it eventually, and you're going to need to have the media on your side. You're going to need to have first aid supplies just in case for either patients or for perhaps your personnel within that facility. Also, sheltering. Is it going to be sheltering in place? Is it going to be sheltering in another location? Do you have an alternative care site, etc.? That's why you need this equipment. And then facilities, emergency operations, emergency rooms, first aid room, sheltering, as well as a sanitation room. Is there a hazardous material incident? Well, if that happens to be the case, then you're going to need to have a sanitation room or shower area that's going to be used. Or you may have the hazardous materials unit externally come in from the fire department that may set up their hazmat unit, may set up their showers, may set up their decontamination unit someplace, and being able to assist you in those areas. So identification of your resources will be critical in your recovery planning. In identifying your resources here, you have to understand your organizational capabilities. You don't want to stretch the means and your financial means as well as your executive leadership. You want to make sure that you have training, you have evacuation plan, your employee support systems that are going to be out there. This way they understand that you truly care about them and that your resources are going to be made available. And then finally here on this slide, backup systems. What happens in the event that the organization is shut down? It happens to be relocated to a temporary setting. Well, you still need payroll. You still need to have employees. You still need to have communications going and emergency power. You need to have recovery. You need to have support. You need to have shipping and receiving. Ooh, yeah, that little thing, because that's what earns and makes things work well for you. So understand that having backup systems for recovery is not just something simple like, okay, we're going to provide food and we're just going to have a couple tables and chairs set up. All these things that I mentioned here are definitely something you should consider when developing your resources as well as your recovery planning for business continuity. And as I mentioned just now in the previous slide, your external resources are going to come into play. You need to have people that are going to work alongside you in every aspect, and identifying what those external resources are and those sources are going to be is critical. So, for example, your local emergency management office, understand who's in charge of that office, who the key players are, and what the contact numbers are in order to get in touch with them. Your alphabet police, as I affectionately like to call them, your FD, your PD, your EMS, local agencies, get to be familiar with them. Understand that they can work alongside you in training and education and provide bountiful resources to you and for you when an emergency strikes. Utilities companies, as far as contractors are concerned, if you happen to need to rebuild, or if you happen to, well, have to tear down walls because there's at least 3 or 4 feet of water in 200,000 square feet of your facility in the basement, all the way up onto your first floor, well, you're going to need contractors. So understand that contractors are going to be an integral role in that aspect, as well as insurance carriers. Make sure that you have insurances. Make sure that you are up to date on those policies and that they're not covering certain areas or forgot to cover certain areas. Those will be critical should the need arise. And then finally on this slide, hospitals, hazardous materials response teams, emergency equipment suppliers, etc. So if you're working in a private entity or a private organization, well, then know your hospital personnel, know your hospital presidents, know who's overseeing marketing. Understand that hazardous materials response teams may be needed. That can be not only from your local emergency management, but also your fire departments too. And then your emergency equipment suppliers, have more than one. A lot of people oftentimes do business with one supplier and say, oh, that's it. I'm fine with that. Well, what happens if that supplier is impacted or can't deliver anything to you? Again, point well taken, I hope. You need to have somebody else that's going to be out there. Normally what I did was I was 3 deep pretty much with everything, whether it's going to be with my plan, if it's going to be contacting personnel, if it's going to be with leadership, or if it's going to be with my suppliers. It's not that I don't like any of my suppliers, having competition, which is good. But at the same time, if one of those suppliers can't come through, then at least I have a backup, and then I have another backup to that. Normally, if you're 3 deep, you should be okay. So these are some of the external sources and resources that you should consider in making your recovery and business continuity plan. We talked about mitigation before, and we're going to talk about mitigation again real quick. The reason why is because you need to premise this by preparing some of the basic policies and implementing that during the times of emergency situations. You've already done this, hopefully, and now you have your practices all aligned. And the mitigation then is providing guidance and pertaining to long-term reduction of those hazards and vulnerabilities that are out there, and then identifying your resources that are going to be necessary to help your facility, as well as identifying supporting systems, as well as your backup system. So we touched on this before, but I wanted to bring this up again due to the fact that mitigation is an important piece of your recovery as well as your business continuity. We saw the disaster cycle. This is part of the disaster cycle, and this is a very integral role in being able to identify those sources for yourself. And looking at some of the factors that make your recovery plan or business continuity plan doable, you need to consider some of the geographic and technological factors. Well, what are you saying geographic for? Well, if you happen to have, let's say, a hospital that was flooded because you were located next to a drainage ditch that was maybe a football field away, but because there's not proper drainage, and when you have a 5-inch rainstorm within a matter of an hour, it doesn't hold water well. And when that floods and it's all cement, there's no place for the water to drain out, and no place for the water to go into the ground because it's so saturated, and plus it's cement. So you have to understand here the proximity to floodplains, hazardous materials areas, airports, transportation routes, nuclear power plants, all these things. So this way you understand that this is your geographic location, and you can then decide your mitigation, your preparation, your recovery, and your planning phases. So this identifies your area specifically. Again, you don't want to be too broad, but you don't want to be too narrow. There's a fine line and a fine balance. And then your technological factors here. So you're looking at safety system failure. You're looking at computer system failure, power failure, HVAC failure. telecommunications, emergency notification failure, etc. These all need to be on your recovery plan. And the reason why is communication, communication, communication. People need to know. The media wants to know. Your constituents within your organization also need to know as well. So looking at this, you need to understand that any type of system or computer system is going to be an integral role right now due to technology being the number one facilitator for everything that we do, whether it's in a private organization, a public entity, or if it's going to be out in the field. We need to have things that are up and running. And that's why these geographic factors and technological factors come into play for your business and your recovery planning. And to summarize what we just learned in this lesson, and hopefully throughout the term, identify and organize your resources. I can't emphasize that enough. Organization is going to be key for making sure that life safety is going to be out there and for your business to operate after a disaster has taken place. Conduct training and educational seminars as frequently as possible in order to stay on top of things, in order to make sure that you have updates, and being able to allow your employees the opportunities to ask any questions and raise any concerns that they may have during those seminars, and provide a better method for yourself perhaps to create and update any of your policies. Evaluation and modification of your plans, that should be done at a minimum at least every 6 months to review it, to see if everything is still the same. If the names, faces, and places are the same, great. If not, well, you have to add and subtract and make those changes as necessary. And finally, implement the actions taken. So if you've done all these things, if you've done the organization, if you've done the preparation and mitigation, you've done the training, and you've done the educational opportunities here, then implement the actions that you've taken, meaning that put them into practice. Make sure that you're reviewing, make sure that people know what's going on, make sure that they understand that you're there for them. If you happen to be the emergency manager, or if you happen to be the preparedness coordinator, whatever it may be in that particular facility, implement those actions. Be proactive. Don't be reactive when it comes to disasters and disaster management. A disaster can strike at any time, as we all know, and certain circumstances will arise when those disasters do occur. So make sure you're not caught flat-footed on this, and make sure that you're due diligence when it comes to implementing your actions. And I'd like to thank you very much, not only for a great term, but also for your participation here and reviewing these lectures and your questions, and some of your very good research that you provided throughout the term. I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to work alongside you this term in reaching your goals and objectives. Hopefully we did that. Hopefully you enjoyed the lecture series, as well as the different types of things that we've done with our personal reflections. And I do wish you all the best of luck, should our paths not cross, in your academic endeavors and your occupational endeavors. Many blessings to you and your loved ones. And thank you once again for a great term.